We've been sold a lie, that life has a clear purpose, that if we search hard enough, we'll find it, like someone finding a treasure map. But what if there's no map at all? Even worse, what if there was never any treasure to begin with? For centuries, humanity has tried to answer the same question. Why are we here? Philosophers, scientists, religious leaders, and thinkers have proposed theories, but none of their answers seem definitive. Some say the meaning of life lies in faith, others in reason, others in pleasure. And then there are those who say, without fear or regret, that life has no meaning at all. But if that's true, what do we do with our existence? If there's no predetermined destiny, how do we keep ourselves from getting lost in the void? Maybe the real problem isn't the lack of answers, but our obsession with finding them. Philosophy isn't a collection of abstract ideas reserved for intellectuals in dusty libraries. At its core, it's the most powerful tool humanity has created to understand existence and the world around us. It's not just about pondering unanswerable questions, it's about learning how to ask the right ones. Since ancient times, philosophy has sparked revolutions, fueled the biggest shifts in history, and empowered those who refuse to accept imposed truths without questioning them. Why do we live? What is good and evil? How do we know what's real? Philosophy rarely gives definitive answers, but it teaches something even more valuable: the ability to think critically and deeply. And in a world full of manipulation, that's a power very few know how to use. What's fascinating about philosophy is that it doesn't belong only to great thinkers or books written in complex language. It's present in the everyday life of anyone who's ever questioned a rule, doubted a belief, or felt that the world isn't as simple as it seems. Whether it's choosing a career or deciding whether to stay in a relationship, we're using philosophical reasoning, even if we don't call it that. Think of someone stuck in a job they hate. They can settle and accept their fate, or they can ask themselves, is this really what I want for my life? In that moment, without even realizing it, they're applying one of philosophy's most essential questions. What does it mean to live a life worth living? Throughout history, humanity's greatest breakthroughs have come from philosophical minds that dared to challenge the status quo. Socrates was sentenced to death for asking uncomfortable questions. Galileo was persecuted for defying the official view of the universe. Nietzsche shook Western thought by declaring the death of God. Each of them, in their own way, broke with tradition and faced rejection from their time. And today, in an era where social media tells us what to think, philosophy remains a vital tool to keep us from becoming just cogs in a system that doesn't want us to question anything. Learning to philosophize isn't a luxury. It's a necessity for anyone who doesn't want to live with their eyes shut. Some say philosophy is useless because it doesn't make money or have practical applications. But if you think about it, all of humanity's biggest decisions have depended on a philosophical vision. Human rights, democracy, science itself. They all began with someone asking the right questions at the right time. Even in business, the most successful entrepreneurs aren't those who just follow trends, but those who challenge what's already established and create new ways of seeing the world. In this sense, philosophy isn't just useful, it's essential for anyone who wants to lead instead of follow. And if you've made it this far, you've probably already realized that philosophy matters more than most people think. But there's still one question lingering, one humanity has tried to answer since the dawn of time, and that continues to haunt anyone who dares to reflect. What is the meaning of life? It's not just a theoretical concept. It's a personal restlessness that hits everyone at some point. Some find comfort in religion, others in science, and some simply choose to ignore it. But if this question has survived for centuries, maybe it's because there's something in it that just can't be ignored. The question about the meaning of life isn't new, nor is it exclusive to a select group of thinkers. It's a mystery that has followed humanity ever since someone first looked up at the starry sky and wondered why they were here. It's not just curiosity, it's a deep need to find order in the apparent chaos. But the problem is, there's no single answer. Some cultures have found meaning in their connection to nature, others in the pursuit of knowledge, and still others in religious faith. And that's where the dilemma lies. Does a universal meaning exist, Or does each person have to find their own? Despite all our advances in science and technology, we're still stuck with the same question, as if it were an open wound in the human mind. History shows that when people can't find a clear purpose, they risk falling into existential emptiness. Great civilizations didn't collapse only because of wars or economics. They also fell because they lost the sense of direction that once held them together. In modern times, this is reflected in the rise of anxiety and depression. We're surrounded by comfort, but that doesn't mean we understand why we're here. It's like having all the pieces of a puzzle without knowing what the final picture looks like. That's why so many people seek refuge in ideologies, religions, or social movements, hoping someone will give them a definitive answer. But what if the real problem isn't the lack of answers, but the way we're asking the question? If we look at the past, we see that each era has tried to answer this dilemma in its own way. In the Middle Ages, religion had the answer. Life was a test to reach paradise or avoid hell. During the Enlightenment, reason became the new guide, and life's purpose was to advance knowledge. Today, we live in a time where we no longer know what to believe. We're told that material success is the key, but even billionaires feel empty. We hear that happiness is what matters most, but no one really explains what being happy means. It seems like the meaning of life is a mirage. The closer we think we are, the further it drifts away. And this is where the real question arises. Are we even looking in the right place? Maybe the problem isn't that life has no meaning, but that we expect to find it as if it were some lost object. But what if the meaning of life isn't something we discover, but something we build? This idea, as unsettling as it may be, has been the starting point for some of the greatest thinkers in history. And this is precisely where philosophy breaks away from religion, because while one offers definite answers, the other dares to explore the doubts with no guarantees. But before diving into that, it's worth understanding how religious traditions have approached this mystery. Long before books and universities existed, even before the word philosophy was invented, early humans were already wondering about the purpose of life. In ancient civilizations, these questions weren't framed in abstract terms, but told through myths and stories about gods and heroes. In Egypt, life was seen as preparation for eternity. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh told of a powerful king who realized that neither riches nor glory could grant him immortality. From the beginning, humanity has felt the urge to find a meaning beyond survival, beyond the immediate. And it was from this longing that philosophy was born. In ancient Greece, this search took a new direction. Instead of relying on myths, some thinkers began to question the nature of reality using a revolutionary tool, reason. The first philosophers, known as the Pre-Socratics, moved away from divine explanations and started looking for answers in nature itself. Thales of Miletus believed that everything in the universe originated from water. Heraclitus claimed that change was the only constant in life. Parmenides, on the other hand, insisted that change was just an illusion. Their ideas were different, but they all shared one thing in common. They were opening the path to a completely new way of thinking about existence. Then came Socrates, bringing a radical shift in how these questions were approached. Instead of searching for the origin of the universe, Socrates turned his attention to human life. How should we live? What is virtue? What does it mean to be just? His method, based on constant questioning, challenged traditional beliefs and led to his death sentence for corrupting the youth. But his legacy was so powerful that his student, Plato, continued to develop his ideas, suggesting that the material world was just a shadow of a higher reality. His own student, Aristotle, took a different path, searching for the meaning of life through the development of human potential, excellence, and reason. These early philosophical reflections laid the foundation for everything that would come afterward. They established the idea that the meaning of life shouldn't be accepted blindly, but examined and debated. And although every philosopher had their own unique perspective, they all agreed on one thing. The question of life's purpose was too important to be left to chance or tradition. But while philosophy moved forward along this rational path, other traditions continued to find answers in spirituality and religion. And this is where a fascinating contrast emerges: the philosophical vision versus the religious vision of life's meaning. While philosophy searched for answers through reason, religion offered a different path: faith. Throughout history, nearly every civilization has used spirituality to give meaning to existence. For many traditions, life isn't an end in itself, but a preparation for something greater. In Christianity, the central idea is that life is a test, and the true purpose is to get closer to God and attain salvation. In Islam, the focus is on obedience to Allah and living a righteous life to reach paradise. Hinduism sees life as an endless cycle of reincarnations, where every action determines the soul's fate in its next life. Different visions, but with a common thread: the purpose of life lies beyond the physical world. What's interesting is that religion doesn't just offer an explanation, it provides a structure. While philosophy can get tangled in unanswered questions, religion delivers certainties. This has brought comfort to millions of people throughout history, but it's also caused tension with those who seek life's meaning in a more individual way. Some religions set strict rules about how life should be lived, what must be done, and what should be avoided. In Buddhism, the key is to free oneself from suffering through enlightenment. In Judaism, life is understood as a commitment to God and His law. In many cases, these doctrines have helped people find direction in uncertain times, but they've also been used as tools of control and power. However, problems arise when someone begins to question those beliefs. What if there is no higher purpose? What if life has no meaning beyond the one we give it ourselves? This is where spirituality and religion start to diverge. While religion tends to offer structured answers, spirituality allows for a more flexible approach, where each person can find their own meaning without rigid dogmas. That's why many people today identify as spiritual but not religious, seeking connection with something greater without relying on institutions. Some find meaning in meditation, others in nature, and others in the pursuit of inner peace. In this way, spirituality doesn't impose answers, it opens doors. But what happens when someone finds no comfort in either religion or spirituality? That's when the great challenge of modern thought emerges: the crisis of meaning. In a world where traditional beliefs are in decline and science has replaced many old explanations, more and more people are facing the possibility that life has no inherent purpose. How do we live when there's no predefined guide? This is the question that tormented existentialist philosophers and gave rise to one of the most provocative schools of thought in history. When religion began to lose its grip on life's big questions, a void appeared. There were no longer definitive answers about life's purpose, and in their place emerged an unsettling new reality. Maybe there is no inherent meaning at all. It was in this context that existentialism was born, a philosophical movement that doesn't look for universal answers but confronts existence exactly as it is. Jean-Paul Sartre was one of its greatest voices, claiming that human beings are condemned to be free. In other words, since there is no predetermined purpose, it's up to each person to create their own. The idea sounds liberating, but also terrifying. If no one imposes meaning from the outside, then everything depends on us. And not everyone is ready to carry that weight. The existential crisis is an inevitable consequence of this mindset. In the past, the rules were clear: live to serve God, fulfill your destiny, or fit into a society that showed you the path. But when those certainties vanish, the question "what now?" becomes unbearable. Albert Camus, another existentialist philosopher, pushed this idea even further with his concept of the absurd. Life has no meaning, but that doesn't mean we should fall into despair. His famous example, the myth of Sisyphus, describes a man condemned to push a boulder up a mountain, only to see it roll back down and repeat the process forever. For Camus, this symbolizes the human condition. With no divine purpose or guaranteed destiny, the only real choice is to find joy in the act of living itself. Or as he said, we must imagine Sisyphus happy. But here lies a real problem. Not everyone can accept that reality without feeling a crushing emptiness. If life has no meaning, then why get out of bed in the morning? This is the great paradox of existentialism. On one hand, it frees us from imposed structures, but on the other, it leaves us alone in an indifferent world. Some people face this by creating their own purpose. Others distract themselves with work, superficial pleasures, or the pursuit of wealth. And sadly, some reach the conclusion that if life is meaningless, then it's not worth living. This despair has been the center of many philosophical debates and has driven some to seek answers in action, in art, or even in rebellion against the status quo. At this point, an even more radical question emerges. What if the real issue isn't that life has no meaning, but that we've been taught to believe it should have one? This is exactly the line of thinking that Nietzsche developed through his concept of nihilism. For him, true liberation wasn't about finding a purpose, it was about accepting that there isn't one. And from that acceptance, we gain the power to create our own values. But this idea is hard to digest, and that's why many fear nihilism as if it were a threat. However, ignoring it doesn't make it go away, and to truly understand its impact, we need to dive deeper into what it means. If existentialism leaves open the possibility for each person to build their own purpose, nihilism has little patience for detours. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who popularized the term, didn't just question traditional morality, he also declared the famous phrase, "God is dead." He didn't mean this literally, but rather to describe the collapse of the absolute values that had supported humanity for centuries. In other words, there was no longer an authority to tell us what was right or wrong, what gave life meaning, or what our purpose should be. Reality then is this: we're here by accident, without written rules or divine missions. So the question shifts: if life has no objective meaning, what do we do with it? To many, nihilism is terrifying because it destroys the illusion of stability. If nothing matters, what stops everything from falling into chaos? This is the most common criticism of nihilism, and yes, some interpret it as an excuse for cynicism, apathy, or even destruction. But Nietzsche didn't see nihilism as a dead end. He saw it as a chance. Instead of clinging to inherited values, he proposed something radical. If the old world has collapsed, let's build a new one. In his vision, this gives rise to the overman or superhuman, someone who doesn't rely on handed-down truths, but instead creates their own values. In short, if life has no meaning, then we are free to invent one. But that also means taking on a responsibility not everyone is willing to bear. The problem is that not everyone reacts to nihilism with creativity and courage. For some, the absence of purpose leads to despair or total indifference. Why make an effort if nothing matters? This kind of passive nihilism can be dangerous. It results in stagnation, in a life with no direction. That's why nihilism has often been misunderstood, seen as the enemy of progress and morality. However, when properly understood, it can be a powerful tool. Instead of seeing it as a dark abyss, it can be the opportunity to design a life free from imposed constraints. But to do that, we have to ask the right questions. If there's no universal meaning, what does science tell us about our existence? This is where we step into a different territory. While philosophy and religion have tried to give life meaning from a conceptual point of view, science approaches the question through observation and evidence. What do biology, psychology, and cosmology say about our existence? Is life just the result of chance, or is there something more at play? These questions take us to a new level of analysis, where reason and experimentation attempt to answer a dilemma that has haunted humanity since the beginning of time. While philosophy and religion have debated life's purpose from abstract perspectives, science has taken a different approach. No assumptions, no dogmas, only evidence, only evidence. From biology, the answer is clear. Life has no cosmic purpose, only an evolutionary function. We're here because our ancestors survived long enough to reproduce and pass on their genes. Biologically speaking, every living being exists to perpetuate its species. But while this explanation is logical, it's not enough for most people. After all, if the sole goal were reproduction, what would be the point of culture, art, or the pursuit of knowledge? That's where science begins to collide with our expectations of meaning. Psychology, on the other hand, offers a view closer to the human experience. Many studies have shown that people who feel their life has purpose tend to be happier and healthier. But that purpose isn't something built into the universe, it's something each person creates. From Martin Seligman's theory of well-being to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, science suggests that purpose isn't a destination, but a process. It's built through meaningful relationships, personal growth, and contributing to something greater than ourselves. In other words, the feeling of having a purpose is an evolutionary strategy that motivates us to keep going. But that doesn't mean there's a universal meaning. Cosmology, the field that studies the universe as a whole, reveals an even more unsettling truth. From the Big Bang Theory to the universe's expansion, everything indicates that the cosmos wasn't made for us. We're a cosmic accident, a coincidence in an immense and indifferent universe. Carl Sagan captured this perfectly when he described Earth as a pale blue dot, a tiny planet floating in the vastness of space. There's no sign that the universe has a master plan for humanity. But instead of being depressing, this can actually be liberating. If the universe doesn't give us meaning, that means we have total freedom to define it for ourselves. And this is where science and philosophy finally meet. If life has no purpose imposed from outside, but our psychology pushes us to seek one, then the conclusion is unavoidable. The meaning of life is not discovered, it's created. There's no universal manual telling us what to do, but there are clues about what makes us feel fulfilled. Some people find meaning in knowledge, others in art, in helping others, or in building something that lasts. But this idea isn't new. For centuries, some philosophers have suspected that life's purpose isn't something we're given. It's something each person must forge for themselves. If science tells us there's no universal purpose, and philosophy warns us that no one's going to hand it to us, then there's only one option left. We have to create it ourselves. This idea might sound obvious in theory, but in practice it's a massive challenge. It means there's no right path, no guarantees, and that each person must take full responsibility for their own existence. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps, wrote in his famous book Man's Search for Meaning that even in the worst conditions, human beings can find meaning in life. For some, that may be art. For others, family, knowledge, or overcoming hardship. There are no absolute answers, only choices. But creating meaning doesn't mean inventing something random and clinging to it blindly. It's not about repeating empty motivational phrases or convincing yourself that every activity has value. Finding meaning takes exploration, trial and error, and above all, honesty with yourself, without falling into cliches. A good starting point is asking, what activities give you a sense of fulfillment? Not necessarily instant happiness, but that deep kind of satisfaction that comes from effort and dedication. Sometimes the answers aren't in what we were told we should do, but in what truly makes us feel alive. And yes, this means each person has to find their own way of experiencing life meaningfully. A common mistake is thinking that the meaning of life has to be something grand, something worthy of being written into history books. But that's just the ego talking. Some people find purpose in simple yet powerful things. Someone who devotes their life to teaching because they enjoy helping others discover their potential. Someone else who finds meaning in music, not to become famous, but because every note connects them to something greater than themselves. Purpose doesn't have to be a monumental mission. Sometimes, it's the small actions repeated every day that build a meaningful life. But there's one final trap. Purpose is not static. It's not something you find once and never have to question again. Life changes, priorities shift, and what once made sense may no longer fit. That's why, more than finding a purpose, we need to develop the ability to adapt and redefine it over time. And here comes a question that many overlook. Does having a purpose mean being happy? Or are they two completely different things? We're often told that finding our purpose will make us happy. But is that really true? Happiness and purpose are concepts that, while they can be connected, don't always go hand in hand. Some people find purpose in causes that bring them more pain than pleasure. Think of a doctor who dedicates their life to treating terminally ill patients. Their work is deeply meaningful, but not necessarily joyful on a daily basis. The same goes for artists, activists, or entrepreneurs who sacrifice comfort, time, and stability for something they believe in. So if purpose isn't the same as happiness, then what exactly is it? Happiness, according to psychology, is a fleeting emotional state, a series of positive moments that come and go. It's like the weather. A sunny day doesn't mean it will never rain again. Purpose, on the other hand, is tied to a deeper sense of direction and meaning. You can have a clear purpose in life and still go through difficult times, stress, or frustration. In fact, Some of the most successful and purpose-driven people have gone through extreme hardship. The key is understanding that happiness is a temporary outcome, while purpose is what keeps you moving even when happiness is nowhere in sight. One of the biggest modern mistakes is chasing happiness as if it were the ultimate goal. Social media, advertising, and pop culture have sold us the idea that the ideal life is one of constant enjoyment. But that's an illusion. Studies show that people who base their lives solely on the pursuit of happiness tend to feel more dissatisfied over time. On the other hand, those who prioritize purpose, despite facing more difficulties, tend to feel that their lives have more meaning and direction. In other words, chasing happiness can be a trap, while building a purpose often leads to far more solid long-term fulfillment. However, this leads us to an even bigger question. If purpose isn't something we find but something we build, do we really need one to live fully? Is it possible to simply exist without obsessing over giving everything a meaning? This is a question that has divided philosophers, scientists, and thinkers for centuries. And the answer might not be what you expect. After exploring philosophy, religion, science, and psychology, the most uncomfortable question of all arises: do we truly need a meaning in order to live? Humanity has spent centuries trying to answer this question. But what if the real answer is that there is none? Some philosophers argue that our need to find a purpose is just a survival mechanism, a clever evolutionary trick to keep us active in a chaotic world. What would happen if we simply accepted life as it is, without needing to assign it a deeper meaning than the raw experience of being alive? For some, that idea is liberating. For others, it's terrifying, and that's exactly where the dilemma lies. Some people find peace in the idea that there is no built-in purpose, and that life doesn't need to be something in particular. That doesn't mean giving up. It just means letting go of the obsession that everything must have some profound significance. Think of a child playing. They don't need a cosmic reason to have fun. They just do it. What if life worked the same way? Maybe instead of exhausting ourselves searching for a grand truth, we could simply enjoy the process, do what makes us feel alive, and let the rest unfold. It's not about living without direction. It's about realizing that the meaning of life might be as simple as experiencing it without the pressure to justify it. But of course, that idea isn't for everyone. Some people need a concrete purpose to feel at peace, and that's okay. The key is realizing that life doesn't have to fit a specific mold. Some will find meaning in building something big, others in love, others in learning, and others simply in enjoying the moment. The real trap is believing there's only one right way to live. That's where many people get lost, searching for answers outside, instead of listening to themselves. In the end, maybe the question about life's meaning isn't as important as what we actually do with our lives. There's no single right answer, and that's exactly what gives us freedom. But if you've made it this far, it means you're interested in this kind of reflection. And if you're left with questions or want to explore more ideas like this one, there's still much more to discover. Here's the truth that few dare to accept. The meaning of life isn't something you find, it's something you decide. We spend too much time waiting for someone to tell us what to do, which path to follow, what purpose to adopt, when in reality, the only question that truly matters is, what are you going to do with the time you have? You don't need anyone's approval. You don't need a universal meaning to validate your existence. The only person who can define what's worth it is you. But be careful, because inaction is the greatest enemy. This isn't about sitting around thinking forever. It's about making decisions. If something you heard here sparks something in your mind, then you already have what you need to start moving. Don't wait for life to hand you a purpose. Go out and build one. Do something with what you've learned today. Make a choice. Change a small action. Question what you've always taken for granted. This is just the beginning. If you want to keep exploring ideas that shake you, that make you think deeply, and that give you the tools to build a more meaningful life, then subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because this isn't just about philosophy, it's about learning how to live without fear.